Welcome to the Old Stuff Show. Another day, another beautiful sunny day, and today we have an interesting program about old magazines. Magazines were very popular for much of the 20th century. They were a staple of most families. Magazines like Time and Life and Canada Maclean's, but they declined, and they declined because many other forms of media took over. For example, the Vietnam War was covered by all the magazines, but then TV came, and a lot of news on TV about Vietnam, and it was the first war covered daily by TV. So magazines began to have competition, and they slowly declined over the years. So what I'm doing today is I'm choosing a few of the main topics, types of magazines, and give you some examples and tell you a little bit of the related information. News coverage would be one of the more obvious things that magazines were doing. They would cover things like politics and social issues and wars. One magazine that was in vogue at the time was Look. Here's a Look 1953, February 23rd, and it's really quite amazing to look at it. Here we are, there's Nixon, and the question is Nixon fit to be president? And rather amazing that in 1953 there would be a magazine cover with that question on it. And so he was even being questioned way back then, and in this case it was about his income tax returns. So he became president in 1969, and he was the 37th president of the United States. But then, of course, Watergate came, and it makes this article a little more fascinating to look at. But Look magazine was one of the more common magazines of the time, and Life, of course, was very important in those days. Life started in 1936 and was a mainstay until the 50s, and then its readership declined slightly and its format declined. Time magazine, similarly, and Time was known for the Person of the Year, and it was around for many, many decades. So magazines such as Look, and here's a Time here, Presidential Advisor Clark Clifford. So those are the basics that people would remember way back then. So another area that we would look at as a collectible would be the fact that some of these magazines are scarce. Either they no longer exist, or because of the age that you're looking for, way back the earliest copies, they're very hard to find. So some of the magazines that have become rather scarce are magazines like Collier's, and Collier's is fascinating. This is on August 28, 1943, and of course during the war they made use of a little bit of home propaganda against the, in this case, the Italian fascist leader, and so that was a Collier's sample. Here's one that's really quite interesting, and again, this is anti-war against Hitler, Hitler being the monkey in the scene here. So that was designed to instill an anti-enemy feeling. Collier's, like Life and other magazines, covered regular stories. This is a 1950 magazine copy, and this one in 1952. So they covered a lot of different topic areas. Another example of a magazine in those days that was popular was Post. And here's a Norman Rockwell cover for Post magazine, 1957. Here's a 1947 sample. Lots of really great artwork on the covers. And the artwork on the covers made a lot of the artists famous, like Norman Rockwell. Just having his magazine with his drawings would be something that people would do, and some people cut them off and frame them. Some that very few people may have heard of. This one's Woman's Home Companion, 1937. Hearst International in the 1940s. Country Life, this is 1953, it's a British magazine. The Spur, this is December 1st, 1928. This is the Christmas edition. It's very thick, very heavy, and very colorful inside, lots of great pictures and advertising. An American magazine, a very important staple for the female reader in those days is Good Housekeeping. And this one is called The Standard. Standard was a Canadian magazine. Again, lots of beautiful artwork. So just sometimes just for artwork, these magazines become quite interesting and collectible. So either for the artwork, the fact that they're no longer around, or because some of them are very, very early. It's hard to get magazines from the 1920s, for example. So another topic area that I would look at magazines would be advertising. So I can give you some of the mainstay advertisements that show up in a lot of these ads. Cigarettes. There are lots of ads for cigarettes, and the thing about the ads for cigarettes was that they were advertised by very significant people, movie stars, sporting heroes, and they really stressed a lot about the safety of smoking. So here's one. This is on the back actually of the Look magazine, and this one talks about now scientific evidence on the effects of smoking, no adverse effects on the nose, throat, and sinuses of the group from Smoking Chesterfield, and they had done some group study apparently for this. And there's Arthur Godfrey, a television and radio personality. So smoking was mainstream. It was considered cool and safe in those days, and lots of ads around about smoking. One of my favorite, and I don't have my copy here, but I've got it on my phone, is Life magazine from the 50s, and it's talking about more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Oops, there we go. It's hard to believe that they would have something like that, but that was the life of the 50s in those days, no problem. Coca-Cola then is another very big advertiser, and they really in the magazines had some tremendous artwork and magazine and illustrations. So here's an example of a Coke ad in the 40s with military personnel. Just really covered all kinds of topic areas, and again the artwork is considered quite unique. Just about most of these come off of National Geographic back covers. Santa Claus illustrations are very collectible for their ads, especially the Coke ones, and just the slogans, the pause that refreshes, and so on, were popularized by these ads. So Coke, cigarettes, people used fountain pens in those days a lot, so there were a lot of fountain pen ads. and it gives you a little bit of an indication about technology as well. And so speaking of technology, I remember a Collier's magazine from, I think it was 1949, and I sold it a few years ago. But there was an article in there that was rather fascinating, and it was entitled A New Thing Called Television. And the more significant thing about that article was that there were questions like, will it hurt your eyes? So it was in its infancy, and people didn't know what to expect, and not very many people had it, and it was quite an invention and a new thing to be looked at. Automobiles, cars, and inventions were popularized in magazines like Popular Mechanics. I've got this in a plastic sleeve here, but Popular Mechanics, Mechanics Illustrated, often showed cars and boats, and new inventions. There's one at the top says the newest color system, and this is Popular Science. And again, on the back, I'm looking at no single case of throat irritation when you smoke Camels, constantly hammering away at how safe it is to smoke. There were magazines like Car Exchange, lots of car magazines, just car magazine collectors. They love to get the old hot rod magazines or the old car magazines that show the latest models. And even on the Star Weekly, which was a supplement of the Toronto Star, 1965 new cars. When the new cars came out, that was a big deal in those days because there were so few models. So the new Chevy or Ford, that was a big occasion when it was announced. And car companies spent a lot of money on advertising. This is a 1949 double-page ad for Plymouth. So the collectors like to find that, and the car collectors, especially if they have that car, would love to have that magazine sitting in the back seat of the car. Some people, I'm not totally sure whether I would do it myself, but they tear out the ads and they have big boxes of advertising under different topics, and they sell the ads individually. So the newspaper supplements like the Star Weekly, they were very picture oriented, and World War II was covered in some detail in the Star Weekly. But there are other newspaper supplements too, even the comic supplements. They're very collectible today from the old newspapers. But we'll do a show on old newspapers at some point in time. Similarly with sports, again, I'll just give you a few examples and do another program on sports. But the big one, of course, is Sports Illustrated magazine. And if you had number one, which was in the 1950s at some time, number one inside had a number of baseball cards attached inside. So that one is very collectible, and it's worth a fair amount of money. Can't say off the top of my head, but it's very collectible. Sports Illustrated is still around now. The swimsuit editions are very collectible, of course. And just another one, all kinds of sport magazines. This one is just called Sport. But every sport had their individual magazines. So programs, I would call programs under the category of magazines with a magazine format. This one is Toronto Blue Jays, 1989 limited edition. And again, for its collectability, people are looking for stuff like that. Or in this case, the 1983 Detroit Tigers score book and official program. I'm really intrigued. Here's another one of Muhammad Ali, and some of the anniversary issues for magazines are particularly collectible. People look for them. In that case, Muhammad Ali adds to the value of it. Um, what I liked about the some of these supplements, I like the Star Weekly. If you just take one era and one topic, like World War II, there's some great stuff that has come out then, illustrated. This one is really fascinating. This is 1941 October, and it's got a young lady throwing a dart at swastika with Hitler in the middle, and this one similarly, it's very patriotic oriented. People are getting fired up about going to fight against the Germans and against Hitler at the time. The one problem though with eBay is that they will not allow anything with a swastika to be listed. They will allow except coins. I know coins is one exception, and maybe I think stamps as well. But other than that, I would not be able to put that on eBay. They would post a warning immediately that you can't do that. But lots of references to young boys, young people. You know, there's the heroes of war are being emphasized. Again, the patriotism, lots of patriotic samples in magazines and magazine covers, and the actual battles themselves, and lots of photographs inside of that type of thing. So advertising is a pretty big part of magazines as far as collectors are concerned. There's also specialty magazines that I would say is in the collectible area. I know that, for example, magazines about farming, many farmers look for some of the old good farm magazines. This one's from 1954, looking at machinery, looking at methods of farming, and so on. TV guides used to come out then in the 50s, 60s, and they were very, very important. Here's not a TV guide, but something called TV Topics. People relied on these to find out what their programming was going to be for the week. Very collectible. The earlier, the more value. The same with all magazines. The earlier they are, the more valuable they are, and hard to get. Just simple things like architecture, that's a specialty. Arts and decoration. This is really neat, from 1927. That's a very old magazine from 1927. And its value I see here is $25. Again, on the back, Lucky Strike this time, ad for cigarettes. Seems like every magazine had to have an ad, but they were big paying advertisers. Fortune magazine, that's a well-known title, and it's covered all kinds of topics, and this one is 1970. So the specialty magazines are out there, and perhaps a little harder to get. The National Geographics, they started in 1888, and so anything from 1888 to the 1920s, they become the main collectible time period for National Geographics. They command a little more money, and after that, they're so common they're not worth really anything to speak of. The collectability, what determines collectability? Other things that determine that would be the first, for example, the first issue of any magazine. If you are really going to focus on something and you wanted to just focus on getting the first cover or magazine of any title, that would be a challenge. Like Life magazine, for example, November 23rd, 1936. I've seen those sell for around $75 online. That determines collectability. The first friend of mine, he has focused, and it took him a while to get these, but he got the first programs of the original 6 NHL teams. and that's pretty hard to get. And what determines the value there is depends on where you live. So if you live in Boston, then your Boston Bruins first program is very important to you, or you live in Toronto, the Toronto Maple Leafs program is very important. And the case of the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I'm familiar with, I believe the first one is worth around $1,200. But I will do a show in the future, and we'll look at some things like that and show you examples of them. Also, who is on the cover is a determiner of collectability. For example, I showed you Muhammad Ali. He's any notable boxing person would be collectible, being on the cover. Marilyn Monroe commands a lot of attention in the collector's market. Life magazines, there's 4 or 5 different examples of her. Playboy, I think the first copy of Playboy in the 50s featured her, and it's very expensive to buy today. Presidents, royalty will also determine some collectability. Here's Maclean's magazine, 1954, has the Queen Elizabeth on there. So again, on the back I see Massey Ferguson, a good collectible for farm collectors. And for the sports people, Gordie Howe would be a good collectible magazine to get. This one is 1966, and a feature article on him. Again, on the back, Coca-Cola. So that certainly those things determine the collectability. This is the earliest National Geographic that I have is, right at the moment anyways, is December 1926. And on the back again, here's the fountain pen, Parker's Pens ad. So always looking for ones that are a lot earlier. I've never seen them from the 1890s myself, but they're out there, and I guess they would cost you a fair amount of money. So magazines can be fun to look at. One problem with magazines, often, where do you find them? When you find them, my most common place to find them has been in attics or basements. Older people tended to keep these for whatever reason. I just came upon boxes and boxes of old magazines last year. And people would prefer maybe to buy them in bulk, and then they have a copy of everything. Some people just want the particular covers and dates, but basements and attics, the one problem often is that it has a must to it, and that can become, it's not an issue that can't be fixed. I've heard a couple of ways of doing that. One, the best way is just to keep them out in a garage or in the air somewhere, so that over time the must will disappear. If you're doing something 1 or 2 at a time, I've heard that, I haven't tried this, but a paper bag, put your magazine in and put a potato in, and that supposedly takes the must out. But that's something you can research. But must definitely is a little bit of an issue, but it can be fixed. So storing them, the best prevention and to keep everything preserved, the general rule of thumb is out of air, out of light, out of light, out of air. Light will yellow paper, and air will cause it to deteriorate. So keeping it in a regular temperature, I keep mine in a garbage bag covered up, nothing will change. That's the same with newspapers or any paper product like that. You can also get special bags that will keep the items secure, but those are a little expensive if you're doing a lot of that type of work. So I hope that some of you who never thought about collecting news or magazines would be more aware now that when you see something, you want to check out what kind of situation it involves, whether it's coverage of certain major events, or whether it's a very old one, or whether it's a very one-of-a-kind one, or if it has ads that interest you. You want to now make sure that you can purchase it with a little bit of knowledge. And speaking of purchase, my eBay site I have mentioned on other programs. My ID is LONREM, Lonrem. Many of the things I talk about on this program I put on there. I can't put all of the magazines on, there's just too many, but I'll put some on a fairly regular basis. If you see something here on this show that you like and you're interested in purchasing it, just send me a comment and I'll put it on my eBay site. And all of you, when you're looking at the YouTube, my eBay site, but my YouTube site especially, this is something that's important to me, is that you like and subscribe. That's the way I can grow the program, and if you have an opportunity to tell your friends and they have an interest in this type of thing, then that would be appreciated as well. And also the reminder that every Friday I have a new show that will be on, and I plan to do this as long as I can. I think I've got enough in my storage area that I was looking at the other day to do at least 3 years, so this will go on and on and on, and it'll be something different all the time. And the good thing about it is I have the stuff, the real thing. I'm not just talking about it, but I have things to show you. So I've been a collector for a lot of years, and buying and selling is a hobby for me. But it's fun also. So hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something, and I'll say goodbye for now, and see you next time.